Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. Today I thought it would be hopefully interesting for you to talk about 2021 reading goals, and as much as I had one, and look forward a little bit to 2022 and just generally talk about reading goals. I think it will be useful for me, which is why I hope it will be interesting for you to sort of get a handle on where I'm at with my reading goals. I'm in a really good spot, and I just kind of want to run through what they are, how I have met them, and I am trying to decide if I want to set a goal for next year, because I set a reading goal the very first year I was on BookTube, and it worked really well. The first full year that I was on BookTube was 2019. And then I set a reading goal for 2020, and I overshot by a lot. I think I have the book that I was using for my goals. So you can kind of see how I had two reading goals in 2019. Both of them were pretty simple, easy to wrap your head around. My first goal was I wanted to read more books by women than by men, because up to that point, it was always really close, but I always read more books by male authors than by females. And I pretty much crushed that. 66% of the books that I read in 2019 were by women. The others were by men, and there was one non-binary author that you can see right there. And my other goal for that year was that I always tend to read LGBTQ books, but I really focus on the G. So I wanted to increase representation of the L, the B, and the T. And I did that. I went from 3.4% of my reading in 2018 to 20% of my 2019 reading, featuring either lesbian, bisexual, or transgender authors or subject matter characters, things like that. So those were achievable goals. But then we got to last year, and I had my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge. I never actually used this because I had these multi-pronged approaches that I wanted to force myself to read outside my comfort zone. And because it was so ambitious, by the end of the year, I had only met roughly half of the goals that I had set for myself, and I was really stressing out, and I ended up canceling my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone goal for 2020. And then this year, I decided not to do a reading challenge, because this is a thing that I do. I had success in 2019, and then I made it really complicated in 2020. So I kind of block myself a little bit by making things more complicated than they need to be. And actually, I'm curious, do you do that as well? Am I alone? Just because I had success in 2019, I went all in and almost set myself up to fail in 2020. And I have had a much easier time in 2021 not having any kind of defined goal. The only thing I have done that approaches a reading goal for 2021 is the reading challenge from Montana Book Company. It's sort of like a bingo card. They just have all these different categories, and in your reading throughout the year, you have to find a book that will meet that criteria. And then at the end of the year, you turn in your list to them, and they have a raffle. So that is as much of a reading goal as I've had. And I feel like this has been very useful for me, because the challenges that they came up with kind of organically fit in with the reading that I do throughout the year. I frequently will look at bingo cards and other challenges that people do, and I get frustrated when there are like really specific challenges. For instance, I just saw one recently where the challenge was read a book with a blue cover. Now, obviously, there are plenty of books with blue covers, but please don't make me find one. I saw one a while ago that said, read a book with a red door on the cover. It's like, don't make me find a book that I want to read that has a red door on the cover. So I get frustrated with those. But this is specific enough that it's a challenge, open enough that I can fit it in with my regular reading. So that has been good. So I'm going to go through how I've met these challenges in a little bit. I'm assuming that they are going to do the 2022 reading challenge. I think I'm going to stick with this for next year, and I'll make a more formal announcement in January when I finalize plans. But here's what I'm thinking for 2022 right now. If they do another reading challenge, I'll be on board with that. And I really want to focus on my Pulitzer Prize project. So I'm not going to put parameters, because of course in my head, I immediately want to start saying, okay, so I'm going to read at least one Pulitzer Prize project book every month. I don't want to do that to myself. Just work on it. That's going to be my goal. And it's going to be easy to show progress on that because in the 2 years that I've had the Pulitzer Prize Project, in which I try to read every book that has won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction, I've only read 2 books for it because I've always had other things going on, and I've allowed other things to come and get in the way, and now I think I want to put a bit of a focus on that. Obviously, I could meet a lot of the criteria or challenges on here with Pulitzer Prizes or Pulitzer Prize winning books. One of the prompts is Pulitzer Prize winner. So I could easily make both of those goals work in tandem as long as I don't make it complicated. And I love to make things complicated. But I also, in this notebook, have, by the way, this was all really inspired by Doris at Aldi Books and her bullet journal, but I do not have the patience to follow a bullet journal. It's just kind of inspired by her. So this is the Pulitzer Prize Project headquarters in the notebook. It has all of the Pulitzer Prize winners. Blue are books that I had read previously. Yellow or orange are ones that I read for the project. And then pink is when they didn't assign a winner. From 1918 through 1971, I haven't done great with reading. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. There are only 4 books in that era that I had read previously. I've only read 1 since I started the project. But once you get beyond that, there's a lot of blue. I had read a lot. In fact, since 1999, there are only 1, 2, 3 Pulitzer Prize winners that I have not read and had not read by the time they won. So I'm going to work on this next year. Not going to make it any more complicated than that, I don't think. I'm going to think about ways of approaching it. If I can find one that is pretty low key, I'll go with it. But I'm thinking just having the focus will be enough. That's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of reflecting on not having a reading goal in 2021, but having a sort of pseudo reading goal in 2021, and looking forward to having really loosely defined reading goals in 2022. If you have had a reading goal this year, I'd love to hear how it went, what it was, if you are succeeding, if you've thrown it out, if you made it complicated like I love to do. Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you are going to be planning a reading goal for 2022, let me know as well. Maybe you'll inspire me to do something. But then I thought it would be fun to run through this and talk about the books that I read that I added to this in order to complete it. So as of right now, there are 3 spots that I have not checked off. I put the title of 2 of the books on the list because I've started them. So once I have finished those 2 books, there's only 1 left, and I'll talk about what everything is. So the first prompt is a Margaret Atwood title, and that is one of the ones I'm doing right now. I'm using The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. I couldn't decide if I was going to try to do this or Oryx and Crake because I've had both of them on my shelf for a very long time. They've been on my TBR for a long time. So I wanted to use this prompt as an excuse to get to one of them, and I couldn't decide which one I wanted to do. Both of them were available on audio. I am actually listening to this, even though I have a copy. So I did a poll on my Instagram stories, and The Blind Assassin ran away with it. So here it is, but you can see I got this book for free from Borders. It was actually the very first book that I got for free as an employee of Borders way back in the day. It had just come out in paperback. So this is actually, it is a paperback copy of the book, but it had been sent to the store to be given to a staff member. And I was the lucky person who got it. I was actually in training and I saw it on top of a box full of books, and it was at the top, and I was picking it up and I was looking at it, and the man was like, "Do you want it? Take it." So it was the very first book I got for free, which means I got it in circa January of 2001 and haven't read it. So we're over the 20-year mark, and that is scary. Anyway, Margaret Atwood book. This is the one that I am doing. The audio is 18 hours, and I'm about an hour into it right now. So that's how I'm meeting that challenge. Moving down, you have to read 5 children's picture books. Here, I'm not going to show you, but here are the ones that I read that met that. Fry Bread, A Native American Family Story by Kevin Noble Maillard. If you have not seen that book, it's really adorable, and I enjoyed it. Harry the Dirty Dog, Red, A Crayon Story by Michael Hall, The Sweet Smell of Christmas, and Harold and the Purple Crayon. Next prompt was a dystopian novel. So I did The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I listened to that on audio way back in January. I believe it is the only dystopian book that I read this year. So it's the only thing that would qualify for that slot. Luckily, I got it early. The next one is a writer from your hometown or home state. That is one of the other ones that I am currently working on, and I'm doing Work Like Any Other by Virginia Reeves. Interestingly, this book is set in Alabama, but Virginia Reeves is from Montana and currently resides here. So it counts. And this was recommended by Charlie from the Montana Book Company. So I am working my way through it. I am currently 80 pages in and really enjoying it so far. I feel like this has flown under the radar, even though it was longlisted for the Booker Prize in 2016. I hadn't heard of it until Charlie brought it up, and I'm really enjoying it so far. Joel read this book as well, and he has been enjoying it. The next prompt is the 2020 Man Booker shortlist or long list, and either the international or the regular competition. I decided to stay with the regular competition, and I went with Real Life by Brandon Taylor. And this is why this checklist fits so well with my regular reading. I had to read this for the BookTube Prize when I participated in the first round for fiction. So it aligned perfectly, and it was something that I had really wanted to read last year and just didn't get around to. So it aligned with a bunch of different things that I wanted to read, and I really enjoyed it. It's lingering in my top 20 favorite reads of the year. We'll see if it gets knocked out by the end of the year. Then I feel like I cheated on the next two. I didn't really, especially with Kazuo Ishiguro. So the prompt is a writer from another continent, not North America. And I put Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro on the list. So obviously he is not from North America. But I always feel like it's really easy to do an author from Europe. Especially for me, most of the authors that I read are either from Europe or North America. So in my head at the beginning of the year, I put this down hoping that I would have another author that I could slot in. And the problem is the authors that I could slot in instead are already being used on other spaces. So it's fine. He does meet the criteria. In my mind, I wanted to make it a little more complicated, go figure, and find an author who was not from Europe in addition to not, and I believe Kazuo Ishiguro is originally from Japan. Yes, he was born in Japan in 1954, and he moved to Britain at the age of 5. So he is born in Japan and now resides in the UK. So I'm going to leave it. If there was another author that I could have moved into this spot, I would have, but here we are. The other one is actually more of a cheat because the next prompt is another writer from another continent, not North America. And for that one, I went with The Bad Muslim Discount by Syed M. Massoud. So Syed M. Massoud was born in Pakistan. He moved to the United States as a teenager with his family, just like the male protagonist of this book. So because he moved to the United States as a teenager, I feel like I'm skirting the rule a little bit. But he is originally from another continent. And again, this is one of those situations where I put it down on the list. This was something I read in the first half of the year. So was Clara and the Sun. I put it down thinking that somewhere along the way I would have another book to swap in. But all the books I could swap in are being used for a different prompt. And it's much harder to find options for those than it would be for this. So I'm going to leave it. It's going to be fine. I'm not going to try to cram in another book. It meets the criteria. It is a little bit of a technicality in my mind, but again, I like to make things complicated. So the next one is Science or Nature nonfiction. I asked Doris from Aldi Books for a recommendation for this one. She gave me a bunch of really interesting ones, and I went with The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery, which is also in my top 20 reads. And actually, so is The Bad Muslim Discount. So that was something that I really appreciated because I don't read science or nature nonfiction, and I really liked that book a lot. So that's why I enjoyed this challenge because it forced me to get out of my comfort zone and it paid off pretty well. The next one is a novella. And the one that I put down is A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood, which I read in June when I did my Pride Month reading. I have this tiny pocket edition of it from Picador Modern Classics. I really enjoyed this. I liked it a lot. I had only read the Berlin stories by Christopher Isherwood before, And I've always wanted to read A Single Man, and I've saw the movie, but I had not read the book. And again, it paid off. I liked this a lot, and it is in my top 20 reads of the year so far. Then I had to read a book that was 500 plus pages. And I went with The Mirror and the Light, which I had to read for the BookTube prize, again, when I did the opening round way earlier in the beginning of the year. It's funny, this book has kind of faded from my memory a lot more than the other two books in the series did. It's not in my top 20 reads of the year, and I had really anticipated that it would be. When I read it, I thought it was great. I do think it's a little too long. I think she could have either split this into two books or focused a little bit more. I think what really spoiled me was the fact that Bring Up the Bodies was so tight and focused, and this one feels like it sprawls a little too much, although the writing is gorgeous. The next prompt was Pulitzer Prize winner. I went with Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Even though I didn't finish it, I honestly tried. I tried so hard. And if you follow along, you know that already. So it's a Pulitzer Prize winner. I read most of it. I read more than half, and I'm never going to pick it up again. And you know what? I want credit for that work, so I'm taking it. Plus, since this is such a long book, the fact that I made it 566 pages means, that's that's the length of another book. So I am perfectly fine counting that one. I beat myself up about The Writer from Another Continent, but I am perfectly fine taking credit for Gone with the Wind. So a book that's published the year a parent was born is next, and that is my one remaining book. I forgot to grab the book. It's Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. That was published the year my mother was born. So I'm going to, once I finish the Virginia Reeves Work Like Any Other, I'll pick up Go Tell It on the Mountain, and then I have met my reading challenge for this year. A book that was a Best of 2020 title. Now, they don't clarify what Best of 2020 means. I took it to mean the New York Times Best Books of the Year list, and I'll put a link to my reaction to that down below. And I chose Homeland Elegies by Ayad Akhtar. My other motivation for that book was that if that had won the Pulitzer Prize, I would have already read it because I felt like it was a good contender. It ended up not even being nominated for it, but who would have known at the time? Next is a middle grade or juvenile book, and I went with George by Alex Gino, which has now been renamed Melissa by Alex Gino because the protagonist of the book is an elementary schooler who is named George but is transgender and is struggling with coming out as Melissa. And honestly, I don't know why they didn't name it Melissa in the first place. It would have made much more sense. So I'm glad they changed the name of that book. This one, I might swap in something else because I have another option that I just finished. It's a book that became a movie or series. Now, in the beginning of the year, I read My Friend Dahmer, which was, you can see, adapted into a motion picture. So it's still on there. It qualifies, but I'm wondering if I'm going to swap The Power of the Dog in. I read The Power of the Dog for my gimme space. Spoiler alert. Your choice is what they call it. So I wanted to make sure I read The Power of the Dog before the end of the year. So I put it in there, but I might move it to this spot, or I might not, because people have heard of Power of the Dog. People are talking about The Power of the Dog. They're not talking about this book. So why not shine the spotlight on something else? It qualifies. So I just talked myself into it. I'm going to leave it at My Friend Dahmer. And then queer author, LGBTQ+, I did The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles. There were a lot of books that I could have put in there. I could swap it out, but I want to keep that one on because I read it. It's one of the earlier books that I read this year, and I really enjoyed it. And so I want to give it that highlight. And then Indigenous author. I originally had The Yield by Tara June Winch. And by the way, Tara June Winch is an author I could use for Writer from Another Continent, but I originally had her under Indigenous author, and I swapped her for a different category. I swapped her for setting south of the equator because Australia is south of the equator, and I didn't know how else I was going to meet that prompt. So the book that I swapped in place of The Yield was Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich, which is a fantastic book and certainly by an Indigenous author, so it works just fine. And then read a Latinx author. I put Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. Unfortunately, this is the only book I read this year that qualifies for this prompt. I started another one on audio that would have qualified, but I put the audio down because I wanted to read the book in print and I never got back to it. So again, I could use Laura Esquivel for Writer from Another Continent, but I need her for this one. And I could use her for translated work, but I need her for this one. So that's the way it is. Going to the second page, Black author, I put The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Donnie Walton, another book that's in my top 20 reads of the year, and which I wish more people were talking about. I have enjoyed it, so that is what I am using to meet the prompt. A book of poetry, I put Bite Hard by Justin Chin. It's the only book of poetry I read this year, and it was okay. It wasn't as good as the first book of poetry, or the book of poetry that I read last year, but I enjoyed the challenge of doing it. And then choose a book by its cover. Charlie from Montana Book Company recommended The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott. I don't have my copy because I loaned it to my mother-in-law and she has not returned it, which is why you don't loan books to people. And the second they pulled that book off the shelf, I knew that was what I was going to choose for the cover, and I really loved it. It's in my top 5 books of the year so far. Recommended by a friend, I put The Tuscan Child by Rhys Bowen because that was recommended to me by a friend last year, and I got around to listening to it on audio. Sci-fi or fantasy title, I put The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which I read, I want to say July or August, somewhere around there. And I had been wanting to read this one for a while, and I hadn't gotten around to it. So I'm glad I did. I am still iffy on the book itself, though. Staff pick, I talked to Charlie, and they recommended This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone, which I don't have my copy of because I loaned it to my neighbor, and they haven't returned it. So again, this is why you don't loan things to people. But that was what I'm using for that. Book in translation, I put Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri, and this is another one where I like to make things complicated. So Jhumpa Lahiri usually writes in English, but she's become fascinated by the Italian language recently. She wrote Whereabouts in Italian. It was originally published in Italian. She did a translation of it back into English, and it was published. So it qualifies, but part of me feels cheap for putting it there. But I'm going to leave it. It's going to be fine. Also because I don't have anything else that would qualify. A debut title for 2021, I have The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., which is also one of my favorite, in my top 20 reads of the year so far. Biography memoir, I put Just As I Am by Cicely Tyson. Graphic novel, I am not going to say the title out loud, but I will hold it up for you. That's what I did. For mystery thriller or suspense book, I only actually read one book that qualifies for this, and it was G is for Gumshoe by Sue Grafton. I usually turn to mysteries and thrillers if I'm in a bit of a reading slump or if I'm feeling stressed, and I don't do that anymore. I've found lately I have been turning to like either a gay romance or a gay YA book instead, and I think a lot of that is because I don't like what the mystery genre is like after Gone Girl, so I'm having fun experimenting with other things. So it's surprising that that's the only mystery thriller or suspense book that I have read this year. But it is what it is. A book from Obama's favorite books of the year list, Luster by Raven Leilani, which I also read for the BookTube Prize, and it met 2 birds with 1 stone. I read it for the BookTube Prize, and it helped me meet this prompt. Classic literature, I read Passing by Nella Larson and loved it. Setting South of the Equator, again, I put The Yield by Tara June Winch there. I had wanted to put her for Indigenous author because she is an Indigenous Australian author, even though she doesn't live in Australia right now. And the book is set in Australia, which is set for south of the equator, and therefore it fits. History and Politics, I put Conditional Citizens by Leila Lalami, which is about citizenship and America and what it is to belong here. And it's an interesting book. For travel and food writing, I have Taste My Life Through Food by Stanley Tucci. It's a delight. I recommend it. And for my choice, I have The Power of the Dog. I'm not going to move this to something that was adapted to movie. And that's it. That is everything that I've read to cross things off on my reading checklist. I will put a link to the checklist down below if you'd like to check out the actual list, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they pick for 2022. I assume they're going to do this again. I hope they do this again because I have had a lot of fun finding ways to meet this, and it points out gaps in my reading as well, like the fact that I only had one Latinx author to put on here is not great. The fact that there was only one book in translation is not great. So some things I need to work on in the future and be a little bit more aware of. Also, the writer from another continent, I wish I had writers from other continents. I'm sure there are other ones. If I spent time thinking about it and going through all of the stuff that I read, I'd find others. But yeah, so that is how I met, or how I am going to meet, my 2021 reading goal, because this is really the only reading goal I had. And I have 2 books to finish and 1 book to start and finish, and then I'll be done. So again, I would love to hear what your reading goal for 2021 was, if you're having any struggles meeting it. If you are planning one for 2022, let me know what it will be in the not in the description box, but in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for that. And I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.